Hello, everyone. My name is Lee Cunningham. I'm NACADA's web event producer, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Mindset, Right to Fail, and Persistence, Academic Advising in Support of Student Success. We'll begin by having each of our presenters introduce themselves to you. Comfort, we'll have you begin, please.
Hello, I'm Comfort Sumida, an academic advisor with the University of Hawaii at Hilo.
Thank you, Comfort. Vanessa?
Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa Correa. I am an adjunct professor and advisor with Northern Virginia Community College.
Hi, and I'm Noelle Moreland. I am also an academic advisor and adjunct instructor here at Northern Virginia Community College.
Thank you all for being with us today. Comfort is going to get started on our presentation with some information about mindset. So I will pass the mic to her now and we'll begin.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Mindset, Right to Fail, and Persistence. We're happy you're all able to join us today. To get us started, we wanted to review the objectives for the first half of today's webinar, some main points we hope that you will take away. So first, I'm going to introduce the growth and fixed mindsets, then discuss some potential impacts of mindset, and share ways to encourage a growth mindset in your students. I'm going to begin by telling you about why I believe mindset matters, to share a little about what started my interest on this topic. My interest in mindset began with a freshman success course I taught several years ago. It was a course designed for first semester freshmen, covering typical topics that facilitate student success. For example, campus resources, transition to college, academic study skills. In the section I taught, most of the students had been high achieving in high school. I frequently spent time speaking with them before and during class, and through these discussions, I realized early in the semester there were some vocal students who at the time felt college was easy. They completed their required assignments, and they bragged about not needing to put any additional time or resources into learning the material, and they were still getting good grades. They had been the smart ones in high school, and back then they could fly by with little effort. At the start of the semester, they thought it translated equally to college, and they weren't shy about sharing this in class. Since they were receiving decent grades on their assignments, this seemed to reinforce their attitudes and beliefs, the idea that greater effort was not required because they were just smart. At the same time, I did notice other students in my class who were equally as bright, who had consistently put forth even greater effort than required, and they found things to learn in each lesson, even if they had seen the material before. Just as important, they were more engaged in the curriculum and campus in general. They sought out opportunities to become involved, to receive help, and to learn and help others learn. As the semester progressed, I saw how the academic performance of students did not match their expectations and perceptions, but rather reflected their attitudes and effort. The students who were not putting forth much effort and who had earlier commented on how easy their courses were no longer doing well. Instead of changing the effort they put forth, however, this prompted comments on not being smart enough, complaints about poorly written tests, unfair professors, and changing to easier majors. They also didn't take advantage of the resources available to them, such as tutoring, and when encouraged or asked to do so, they were convinced it wouldn't help. Although the second group of students were doing better overall, they did receive grades they weren't proud of. However, for these students, the grades were reasons to evaluate why they weren't doing as well as they had hoped, and to buckle down and find ways to adjust their behavior to improve. This is when I started looking into research on the relationships between student attitudes, effort, and academic performance. Through this, I came across Carol Dweck's research on mindset. I felt that these students were at a point where they could benefit from becoming aware of how their attitudes could impact their chances of success, academically, professionally, and personally. Given that many of my students were in the science fields, the fact that Carol Dweck's research draws upon research on how our brains work, I felt would help to capture their interest. I brought this topic to my students, and we began a semester-long discussion on the idea of mindset and how it could impact their chances of success more than ability. We discussed their reasons for being in college, the motivating factors each of them had for wanting to learn. We talked about reasons for learning and the learning process, beyond grades and a degree. We learned about the physical changes happening to our brains as we learn, and how learning to learn can help make their lives more rewarding in the future. For example, as freshmen, how practicing and learning the material well, beyond the minimum to pass a course, can increase their comprehension and retention, and thus performance in future courses. The idea of mindset complemented the topics in our student success course well, as it illustrated why effort is important, how putting forth greater effort and searching for ways to improve could benefit them. We focused on identifying thoughts and beliefs that could have a positive or negative impact, exploring what motivated each of them to learn. While beginning to learn about mindset, we compared some of our traditional thoughts, what we were told while growing up, with what has been emphasized in recent research. For example, while growing up, many of these students were praised for their talent, their natural aptitude or skill, their ability, their proficiency in a particular area, and their intelligence, their mental acuteness. They were told how smart they were and put into programs designed for gifted children. A part of this was the idea that these characteristics determined what a person was capable of achieving. The smarter or more talented you were, the greater your potential. As a result, students were singled out and praised when they were thought to possess these traits. However, more recently, we have seen new terminology and characteristics coming to the forefront. Some of these are resilience, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or toughness; grit. Angela Duckworth, who coined the term grit, defines it as the quality of being able to sustain your passions and also work really hard at them over really disappointingly long periods of time. And mindset, a set of beliefs or a way of thinking that determines one's behavior, outlook, and mental attitude. These traits give the person the ability to push through challenges and put forth the effort required to learn, develop, and strengthen the characteristics necessary for success. A person's mindset can motivate and direct their behaviors and help them to become more resilient or gritty. With recent research on how our minds work, we're now taking more notice of actions and effort, and we begin to shift our attention away from inborn traits like talent, ability, and natural intelligence. I'm now going to reverse a little and go back to the belief that qualities are set in stone, that we are given a certain level of intelligence and talent that can never be changed. This belief is at the center of what Carol Dweck refers to as a fixed mindset. With a fixed mindset, the belief is that you have a set level of characteristics, which is immutable. Because of this predetermined level, effort is obsolete. You're either good at something or not. You are born with these abilities, and no amount of effort or practice can change them. This line of thinking leads to a focus on validation and the pressure to look smart, using grades and other tests to measure what you are given. Individuals with a fixed mindset constantly compare their basket of skills with others and are threatened by other successes. They shy away from challenges because failure would confirm a lack of talent or ability. They resist feedback because it challenges their beliefs about their abilities or skills. For students, a fixed mindset could lead them to believe they do not need to study, similar to some of my freshmen at the start of the semester, just thinking they're naturally good at a subject, or that there is no purpose to studying and giving up easily. Maybe they believe they just can't get chemistry, they're not smart enough. When faced with something like a bad quiz grade, a fixed-minded individual may give up, assume they just can't grasp the concepts because they're not smart enough. These students wouldn't seek help because they believe they can't get smarter. Instead, they would want to hide their flaws to avoid judgment or being labeled as a failure. Fixed-minded individuals are focused on the outcome, the grade, and would think that the time that they spent studying was unnecessary. To further illustrate the fixed mindset, we're going to look at a scenario, something we've all had, one of those days when things just don't go quite right. So one day on your way to work, you hit a pothole and get a flat tire. Feeling frustrated, you call your spouse for support, but she or he seems more concerned about the car. You're late to work, but make it to the weekly departmental meeting where you present your idea for a new at-risk program, one that you have put a lot of time into. However, your colleagues are less than supportive and point out several flaws in your plan. How would you respond? How do you think a fixed-minded person would respond? Some possible thoughts, actions, and reactions by a fixed-minded person could include, what would they think? They may think that they're not smart enough for the job, or that the whole department is against them, A fixed-minded person may think that they'll never be able to succeed, so why do they even try? Or that no one really likes them. And how would they cope? They would probably spend less time and effort and become discouraged. Notice how a fixed-minded individual feels like they have no control. They feel like a failure, as though they are being judged and are unable to cope. They label themselves and measure their abilities by the day's events. Everything is happening to them. If you felt this way, you can imagine becoming discouraged. Fixed-minded individuals may feel that the day's events were a direct reflection of their competence and worth. However, we're all educators, and we probably have seen individuals who persevere and demonstrate that this is not always true. We do have at least some control. Our intelligence and abilities have not all been defined at birth. So what does this mean? Well, now we get to the good part, looking at the growth mindset. The theory of mindset is built upon the way in which our brain works. Recently, it has been discovered that the brain can change physically. The intricate network of neural pathways within our brain expands and reorganizes as we grow, learn, and forget. With practice, we create and reinforce pathways, making the information and skills more readily accessible, strengthening our abilities and intelligence. The growth mindset is centered on the belief that a person's intelligence and ability can change over time, that they are malleable, changing with practice and effort. The focus is on development and learning, and the knowledge that a person's brain grows as they try and practice new things. A growth mindset doesn't mean believing we were all born with the same level of ability, as each of our genetic endowments are unique, but it stems from the idea that qualities can be cultivated with effort, and that a person's true potential is unknowable. For example, though you may not have been born with athletic talent, with hard work and practice, you can improve your abilities to reach a level that is currently unknown. Growth-minded individuals welcome challenges as it gives them the opportunities to learn and grow. They persist through obstacles, learning from their mistakes and feedback. When others succeed, they are inspired to reach higher and push themselves further. Keep in mind that a person's mindset can differ depending on the situation. A person can be growth-minded in terms of mental ability, believing intelligence is not set at birth, but still believe that personal qualities are. There is no right or wrong, and a growth-minded person can have fixed-minded thoughts, and vice versa. However, a person's mindset has impacts on the effort they put forward, the opportunities they are open to, and their ability to tackle challenges, which we know affects the success of our students. For students, a growth mindset is what can help them recover from a bad grade and push forward. Growth-minded students would look at the situation, evaluate what happened, and figure out ways to tackle the problem so that they can improve in the future. They know intelligence is not fixed and that they can learn. They welcome challenges, seek out feedback, and help when needed, and are eager to learn from others. They focus on the process, how they study, and evaluate what can be changed. So let's go back to our not-so-great day and think of how a growth-minded person might respond. What would a growth-minded person think? They may think that they received a lot of useful feedback. They need to be a little more alert while driving and wonder if perhaps their spouse is having a bad day. And how would a growth-minded person respond? They would use the feedback to strengthen their proposal, pay a little more attention while driving, and perhaps speak with their spouse to see what's going on. Notice the growth-minded response is inwardly focused. What can I do? How can I learn from today's experience? Growth-minded individuals look at a potentially bad situation and see it as an opportunity to evaluate and learn. As academic advisors, we likely have seen the impacts of fixed and growth mindsets on a person's ability to persevere and succeed when faced with difficulty. Students who are growth-minded are better equipped to not only face and overcome challenge, but to evaluate a situation and learn from the experience. So how do we foster a growth mindset in our students? The first step is being more aware of how our words, actions, and reactions can promote fixed or growth-minded thoughts. For example, some may have a tendency to use praise for ability or subscribe to stereotypes, complimenting a student on their artistic talent or saying things like, "You're doing really well in your math course, you must be smart." Praise or stereotypes on abilities can cause a person to feel defined or judged by them. Being labeled the artistic one or the smart one can lead to an overinflated or deflated view of their abilities. This can lead to reluctance in taking on challenges, as challenges could cast doubt on their abilities or reveal where they could improve. Failure can shatter their definition of self. For example, a student who is used to being told how good they are in math may be too fearful of seeking help and breaking this image when faced with difficulties in calculus. When allowing labels to define them, a person may then lose sight of who they really are and who they have the potential to become. Although praise for ability can foster a fixed mindset, praise is still very much a part of facilitating a growth mindset. It is the focus of the praise that is shifted. Praise that is focused on the learning process and growth, the effort that is put forward, and taking on challenges can encourage growth-minded thoughts and behaviors. Furthermore, growth-minded students learn to accept responsibility, and we can help them to overcome challenges with honest, constructive feedback. We can help them by teaching them that failure is part of the process, as difficult as it may be, helping them to recognize and learn from their mistakes. Teach them neuroplasticity, that their brain can grow, that they can learn and improve. We can move the focus from just grades to learning and how it intersects with future success. When a student is not doing well, maybe start the discussion on why. What processes have they been using to learn the material? What has worked? What hasn't? What can they do now? Maybe help them to create an action plan with small, achievable steps. If failure happens, let them know it is okay and help them to learn from it, to evaluate what happened and how to move forward. Praise them for their real attempts and efforts. Support them as they work towards improvement. We can further encourage a growth mindset in others by practicing it ourselves, being conscious of our thoughts and actions, particularly around students, and taking growth actions when able. Studies have shown that students who are praised for the process, how hard they worked, what they have learned, develop growth-minded thoughts and are eager to tackle new, harder tasks. They are prepared to face challenges, even failure, and move forward. I'm going to now turn the mic over to Noelle, who will share the topics for the second half of today's webinar.
Hello. So today, Vanessa and I are going to discuss with you some difference in students who attend community college compared to those who attend a university. We're going to discuss the new generation of college students coming our way. The students that we're working with right now are the borderline between the millennials and Generation Z. We're going to talk about the research and then what we actually see. We're also going to talk to you about right to fail and intrusive advising. We're going to tell you what they are, what the research says, and then what our method is. And then we're also going to talk about definitions of success and failure. Again, what the research says, what our own definitions are, and then what are the definitions we got from students. So first I want to say that there is a difference between students who attend at the community college and students who attend a university. And one of the big differences is income, family income. So at community colleges, low economic students outrank high economic students 2 to 1. Whereas at the university, at the elite universities, high economic status outranks low 14 to 1. So that tells you right there that there is a big difference in where students end up attending college. So as I mentioned, finances play a role. Community colleges are usually about half the cost of a university. And the new generation, they're concerned about money and debt. A lot of times they have to work to pay for college themselves, and they may even be supporting themselves or their family. So another reason students might attend community college, along with the finance, is they're not quite ready for college, whether it's academically or emotionally. Oftentimes they need prerequisite classes or development classes to even get to the classes required for their major. And so to save money on those classes that don't count, they're going to start at the community college. The transfer process is also getting easier from community colleges to universities. Here in Virginia, the Virginia Community College system, we have guaranteed admission agreements from the community colleges with the in-state universities. So just to give you an overview of the population, we work for Northern Virginia Community College. It's a big community college. We have 6 campuses and we offer online. And as you can see from the 2015 statistics, the vast majority of the students that attend our community college consider themselves to be white. And you can see what everybody else is. And then what you see here is Vanessa and I work for a program called Pathway to the Baccalaureate, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But this just kind of gives the overlay of the students we work with, and you can see the vast majority of the students we work with consider themselves to be Latinx. So along with that, we work with different populations that have been known to have adverse effects on students in college, including a lot of first-generation, immigrant, minority populations. We work with students with disabilities, youth in foster care, and parenting students. And a lot of these situations allow us to have a more intrusive type advising to help the students be successful. So with this graph, the green that you see is the regional average here in Northern Virginia, but the yellow is our populations. So for most of them, you can see we have a lot more within our program than what the regional average is, except for the first one, which is median income. So more than half of our students have a family income of $50,000 or less, which can, when you compare to our median region of $130,000 per year, a big difference there. So a lot of our students receive free or reduced lunch in high school, and about 3/4 of them are have applied for financial aid and/or scholarships. So the students coming in, they seem to just keep getting younger and younger, and they bring in different set of skills and difficulties than what most of us experienced when we were in college. So they want to think critically, but only about the things they care about. Otherwise, they don't want to put forth the effort. They have low risk-taking behavior, which was related to the fixed mindset Comfort previously talked about. And it also is related to their own definition of failure and success, which Vanessa will talk about. So the purpose of them being in college is to get a good paying job. That is the reason they are here. So what we see with these students is they do not tend to do well in the classes that they see as pointless. Even if those classes are needed to get to the end goal, they still don't put forth the effort. They are not interested in the journey of the college or the growth process, just the end career. And because of this, they put so much pressure on themselves to know what that end should be and to get there, that it leads to so much stress and anxiety. And then it also leads to a fear of failure. And we see that in our students most definitely. And now Vanessa's going to take over.
Thank you. Thank you, Noelle. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to start my portion of the presentation by talking a little bit about our Right to Fail journey. And it started a few years ago when we introduced J.K. Rowling's Harvard commencement speech from 2008 into our STV 100 course, which is our college success skills course, which students are required to take in our program within the first year that they're enrolled at NOVA. My understanding is that this requirement has now been instituted NOVA-wide, so throughout the college. I also wanted to just give you the heads up that there is a link available in your handout for J.K. Rowling's speech if you're interested in taking a look at that. J.K. Rowling talked a lot during her speech about the significance of failure. She talked about how she was set free when she failed and how she proved to herself that she failed and yet she was still alive. She also talked about how she hit rock bottom and how hitting rock bottom was the foundation for her to rebuild her life, or basically build the rest of her life. So we started to ask ourselves, how do we apply this to our students? What about right to fail for our students? What does it mean? So I started to do a little bit of research to get a general sense of what right to fail was, what the definitions were for right to fail. And I came across two essays that were written in the 1960s. The first was written by William Zinzer, who was a journalist and nonfiction writer, who talked about right to fail as being one of the few freedoms not granted to people within this country. He also talked about how young people find their way and find their path by wandering, by faltering and stumbling, and starting again wandering, faltering, and starting again. And he also goes on to say that failure by itself isn't bad, and that success also isn't automatically good, which I personally thought was super interesting. The second essay was by Albert Sullivan, and he talked about right to fail within the context of conservatism versus creativity. So similar to the fixed mindset discussed by Comfort, conservatism kind of moves away from change, preferring more traditional solutions to problems, and that preventing failure was the essence. That was the key. And so there was a focus on outcome versus the journey towards the outcome. In contrast, creativity, which is similar to the growth mindset discussed by Comfort, moves towards change and looks at right to fail as being the essence of creativity, and that the journey towards the goal is its own reward. And so the focus is then on development and learning. As right to fail relates to higher education, I'll note that there was an increase in enrollment in community colleges during the 60s and 70s. However, it didn't necessarily mean that colleges were providing the necessary support that these students needed. And the predominant philosophy during that time was right to fail, which was the belief that students had the right to enter community colleges, but that there wasn't this institutional commitment or this institutional mandate to employ all means to advance student success. So colleges were not mandated in any way to provide the services that students needed to be successful. Not surprisingly, during the 80s, there was a reduction in persistence and graduation rates, which caught the attention of educational leaders and other stakeholders. And measures were then put into place to increase student success, and a lot of those measures are the ones that we're familiar with. Some of the examples of right to fail policies, which semi-mortified us when we started looking at this, were not requiring students to be advised before they register for classes, very few classes having prerequisites or minimum test placement test scores, and academic interventions happening once the GPA fell below a certain level. So not surprisingly, those students who were the most motivated and the most prepared benefited from these types of policies. And the students that Noel and I work with are super motivated, but as was mentioned, they're not necessarily prepared for college level work. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next few slides. Our program, the program that we work for, Pathway to the Baccalaureate, is a combination of intrusive advising and a much, much, much more modern version of right to fail. With intrusive advising, the emphasis is really on developing that caring and close relationship with students in the hopes that it increases their academic motivation and persistence. And it also involves intervention at the first signs that students are running into academic difficulty. And this is done as a motivating factor for students to seek assistance. The Pathway program itself actually begins in high school. We have partnerships with multiple high schools in the area, and so we come in and recruit students during their senior year of high school. And if they're accepted into the program, we work with them on college prep as well as placement testing. So we have a group of transition counselors that works with students while they're still in high school. And if a student decides to matriculate at NOVA or enroll at NOVA, that's where Noel and I and the other advisors and counselors step in, and we provide academic support and regular support essentially during the entire time that they're at NOVA, with potentially the goal of having them go into a four-year university or transfer to a four-year university. But I will note that a lot of our students do not take that route, and that's perfectly fine. Students are required to meet with us at least once a semester, although we have a lot of frequent flyers who we meet with multiple times throughout the semester. But during this mandated meeting, students are we're talking with the students about academic advising for the following semester. Students are required to turn in a mid-semester progress report, which is a report that they show and have their professor sign to indicate how they're doing in the class at that particular time. This helps us in determining what the next set of classes are for students. So for example, if a student is having difficulty in a math class, we can either recommend that they stick it out in the class and talk about ways to do that, or we plan on them repeating the class the following semester. And we also, if the students are doing fine in their classes, then recommend the next sequence of classes that they need for their degree. We also talk about transfer planning, the transfer process if students are planning to transfer to a four-year school. So we have these close relationship with students, and we very much give them all the information and guidance that they need, but we're not necessarily following up with the students. We're trusting them to do what we have recommended that they do, and that they're following through on what they need to do. The students themselves are registering themselves for classes. They are picking if they want to take an online class, if they want to take a 16-week regular semester, if they want to do shortened classes. But again, we're not following up to say, hey, did you do this or did you do that? We're trusting them that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. The other piece we wanted to mention was that during these advising meetings, we're also addressing the fear of engagement. Our students are terrified of talking to their professors, especially when they're running into difficulty, which makes Noelle and I chuckle all the time because we teach and we're like, we're not scary, at least I don't think we are. And so talking it through with them to get a sense of why is it that they're so scared, look at alternative places for assistance, such as talking to students in the class, potentially getting some tutoring assistance, or really talking through that whole process. And now I'm going to turn this back to Noelle. She's going to talk about our probation students as well as our probation program.
Yes, so here at Northern Virginia Community College, students can be on academic probation after their first semester. Sometimes they have a semester of academic warning. So to be on academic probation, they need to have taken at least 12 college level credits. And then their GPA has to be below a certain point. If they're in some development classes, so they won't be in 12 credits of college level, they end up on academic warning. That these students are the ones we developed a program for students who are on academic probation. So they do still have to fill out the mid-semester progress report that Vanessa talked about. And then what we do more outreach to these students other than just the mid-semester progress report. So our goal is to outreach to them 3 times during a semester. At least 2 of them will be email, and 1 of them would be a phone call. Just so that way they're getting notified by the college that they're on academic probation, but then we are also reaching out to them because we have a few extra steps that they need to do. So we developed an assessment that's available on Blackboard. All the students on probation are put into a class, and the assessment asks them things as simple as how many classes did you miss, how many hours a week did you study, how many hours a week do you work, to facilitate those conversations. But then it also asks questions related to their mental health. And it kind of fishes around for questions related to anxiety and depression. And so after they fill out the assessment, they are required to meet with us 2 times in a semester. And one of those meetings is going to be after they do the assessment. If we're asking those kinds of questions, we definitely want to meet with them face-to-face to talk about those responses and potential interventions if needed. And that is best done face-to-face. So the other meeting is then to usually talk about classes, and there can be more meetings set between the advisor and the student. It really just depends on what the needs of the student is. So it used to be that the probation hold was on their account and students could not register themselves for classes. So us as the advisors, we were required to do that for them. But the college, and then we followed suit, has moved to remove the hold so students can register themselves. But the college rules is that students on probation cannot take more than 8 credits in a semester. So to make sure the students stay within that, we have what we can do, we set a credit limit. So the students cannot register for more than the 8 credits per semester. But by removing the hold, it gives a lot more responsibility back on the students. So they can't say, but my counselor registered me for this and I didn't want to take it. Now it's they register themselves for it. So we can recommend and encourage certain classes, But it's up to the student to register for what they want to. I just saw a student the other day who was on academic probation, and she decided that redoing her calculus with analytical geometry class in an 8-week session online was going to be a good idea. So I caught this before the class has started, and I encouraged against it. I told her, you may not want to do an accelerated online class for this high level of math that you previously failed. And she can either take my advice and change her class out, or she can stay in the class. That is her prerogative. So something that we have to keep in mind is that the system is in place for the students. We are always reaching out to them. Sometimes they're not ready to take advantage of the system to use their resources for their first, maybe even their second semester that they are on probation. But we keep outreaching to them, so we are here when they are ready. Thank you, Noelle. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what failure and success looks like, looking at it from the literature, looking at it from us as practitioners, and then from the student perspective. And when you think about failure, usually you think of dropout. A student wasn't able to complete their degree, students were not able to enroll, and sometimes that is viewed as a measure of failure. Vincent Tinto said that students drop out because they are not integrated into the academic and social systems of college. He also goes on to say that even students who are not socially or academically woven into the fabric of college may still not drop out if they have a high commitment to college completion. And that's certainly something that Noelle and I see with our students, and we see with community college students in general. Community college students have very unique challenges and characteristics that makes it difficult to fully engage in college. But we do have students who are super committed to finishing their degree, and so they are able to not drop out and are able to finish their degree. As I mentioned, community college students have an array of unique challenges. A lot of students are only enrolled part-time because they have to work full-time because they're supporting themselves and or they're supporting their families. As Noelle demonstrated earlier, a lot of our students are from lower income levels. The difference between a family income of $50,000 and $130,000 in this area is enormous. It's huge. Many of our students are first-generation college students, and many of our students are not college ready in whatever aspect that may be. So we have to look at failure differently for community college students. Not receiving a degree does not necessarily equal a failure. We have a lot of students who come to community college to take classes for work or as a way to test run college and see what it's like. So students are maybe getting what they need without getting the degree or certificate. So in terms of my definition of failure, it's definitely multifaceted. It could be students who want to attend classes but can't because of financial, family, or personal reasons. It could be students who don't do well in their classes, so they fail classes or they fail assignments or exams. It could also be students who are not able to transfer to their preferred transfer school. Noelle's definition is a bit broader, and she views failure as students having an expectation and not reaching it. When we talked to our pathway students, we talked to a group of them to get a sense of what they viewed failure as being, and a young woman said that she viewed failure as not applying herself and not embracing the experience. And what I found interesting about this response was that it doesn't talk about academic success or failure per se, but not embracing the experience of being in college. When we look at what success looks like, one of the first things that probably comes to mind is degree attainment. You got your degree, you were successful in college. But similar to the challenges that we run into in defining and measuring failure in community college, we also have similar challenges in defining and measuring success within community college. Because of the sheer diversity of our student population across all measures, it is really difficult to define and measure success.
So possibly looking at milestones instead of degree or certificate completions as success is something that may make more sense with this particular student population. So looking at things like students who are able to finish their developmental courses and are now in college level courses, or students who have successfully been able to pass a calculus or analytic geometry class that they hadn't done well the first couple of times. That could be definitely considered a milestone within this student population. When we look at defining student success, my definition is really based on what the student's goals are. For some students, the ultimate measure could be receiving that degree, while for others, it could be successfully transferring, whether or not they have that degree or are transferring without it. For others still, it could again be finally completing the developmental courses that were needed to get to college level. Noelle's definition is a bit broader, where she says student success could look like students taking lessons learned from failure and moving forward. When we again talk to our group of pathway students, one of the responses in terms of what her definition of student success was being successful both academically and socially, growing and maturing as a human being, and finding my path, which I thought was perfectly phrased. Now we're going to end the presentation by talking a little bit about a couple of failure and success stories within our own probation students. So I'm going to turn it back to Noelle.
So I have a young lady that I worked with. We will call her Katie. And this is a story that was not quite so successful. And to save you the suspense, this young lady was eventually academically dismissed. So the process, I explained how students get to probation here. And if once they reach 24 college level credits and their GPA is below a certain point, they are suspended for a semester. So they have to take a semester off, and they have to write a letter to the dean of students saying why they're ready to come back, and then they can come back. But if their GPA remains below a certain threshold for that semester, they're academically dismissed, which is a 5-year event before they can request to come back. So this young lady, she would come in at the beginning of every semester ready to go, saying she was so excited because she was organized and she was saying she was going to do things differently this semester. But she never did anything differently. She never followed through on my suggestions, one of which was to look at different majors, because I got the feeling she was not super motivated for the major she said she was going for. She never did anything differently. She just would come in with a new notebook and to be organized and say she was ready to go. So eventually she was suspended for a semester, and when she came back from suspension, the same thing happened. So she was academically dismissed. And I still don't think it sunk in with her, the reality of the situation, because a while ago, after being dismissed, she emailed me again, Ms. Moreland, I'm excited, I'm ready to come back. And I had to remind her that I'm sorry, you can't. You have been dismissed, so you have a few more years before you can talk about coming back. So we'll see what happens to her in the future if she does decide to come back. Another student, we will call him Alex. He is a success story. So he was also on probation when I first started working with him. And his MO would be, instead of disappearing the first couple of weeks, he'd stick it out to like mid-semester when things started to get really rough. And then he would disappear as soon as everything started to get stressful for him. So he was also suspended for a semester, but this semester before his suspension was pivotal. He was in an English class, and his first assignment, he got an F. And he came in, instead of just kind of letting it go and disappearing, he came in and talked to me about it. He was all upset, beating up on himself, like, I can't believe I did this, Ms. Moreland. I thought I worked hard on it. I thought I did good. I'm like, all right, well, let's take a look at this. Let's look at the comments your teacher made. Go talk to your instructor. And I worked with him at that point. He was more open to redefining his definition of success. Did he start with an F on his paper? Yes. But success is not starting with an A. I had to remind him that it's improving. So I was like, all right, you got an F on this one. Let's go for a C or a D on the next one. Let's do better on the next paper than on this one. And he did. He worked hard and he did well. And he ended up with an A on his final. And then with all the combined grades, with the slow progression of getting better, he ended up with a C in the class. Now, his other class didn't go so great, and he just missed one exam, which caused him to fail the class, and then his overall GPA was below the threshold, so he was suspended for a semester. I was a little scared because I didn't know how he was going to take it, but he did take that time to reflect on what is his purpose, what is he doing, what is he going to do when he comes back. So he came back, and he's been rocking and rolling forward since then. He is now in our cybersecurity degree, going to transfer. He's working in the field. He has earned his financial aid back, and he's taking care of himself mentally, physically, emotionally. He's happy. He's in a good place. And he even came in last semester to tell me that he got 156 out of 150 on his final. And he was just beaming and just couldn't wait to just tell me that. So this was definitely where giving him the space to fail allowed him to grow.
And I will close out our webinar by talking about a student, I'll call him Vincent. He was one of the first probation students that I worked with when I moved from the Alexandria campus to my current campus at Annandale, Virginia. I've been here for about 3 years now. And from the very beginning, he knew he wasn't doing well and was very open and honest about that, and open and honest about how hopeless and helpless he felt. So we had multiple conversations about his motivation for being in school and what his long-term plans were. He knew he wanted to study finance, but he wasn't really quite too sure where he wanted to transfer to. He took a trip to James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours away from where we are located, and he fell in love. And he came back and he said, I want to study finance at JMU, and that's what he focused on. That's what his overall goal was. And once he was off of academic probation, he had primarily A's with a couple of B's sprinkled in between, but he knew his GPA was not where it needed to be at that particular point to transfer. But he said, you know what, Ms. Correa, I really want to apply anyway. And I said, okay, let's go for it. I wrote him a letter of recommendation. He wrote an exceptional and really, really strong personal essay. And James Madison didn't say no, but they didn't say yes. So what they said was, let's see what your grades are for this semester, and then we'll make a decision. And like the rock star that he was, and he continues to be, he got all A's his last semester, and he is now finishing up his first year at James Madison. So I think the key with Vincent was that he was willing to try. And he always followed through on the plans that we made, on the different steps that he needed to take towards his goals. And I'm so thrilled for him and very proud of him for that.
All right, thank you everyone. That's great information. We're now at the question and answer portion, and we do already have some questions coming in, so we'll get right on those. Looks like there's conversation going on in the Twitter sphere as well as things coming in here, so let's get right to that. The first question I think actually I can answer. There was a question about your slide deck, of the availability of that, and we did include the slide handout in with the overall handout, so if you did not receive that prior to the broadcast, check with the person who is registered at your institution, and they will have the link to where they can get that handout for you. So anybody that didn't get that, again, check with your registrant. Okay, another question was, Noel, on one of your slides, a couple of questions actually about that from one slide. The acronym MSPR was used. I think I heard you say that that was mid-semester progress report. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. And also, there were a couple of people who were interested in the assessment that you talked about. Is that something that's in a form that could conceivably be shared, or is it in your Blackboard in a way that would not be shareable?
Yeah, we have it set up as a quiz in Blackboard, but if people who are interested in it, I'm more than happy to share it.
Okay, great. All right, so if anybody is interested in that, as we said at the beginning, you can email Noelle after the broadcast and she can bring that out for you. Okay, so that takes care of those two questions. Some folks are wondering about everybody's caseload size. That's a question we always get. So Noelle and Vanessa, we'll start with you, and then we'll ask Comfort about that as well.
So,
Go for it.
Okay, Vanessa and I, our caseloads right now are about 540 students, which is on the high end. But that's where we're at. So yes, we do these interventions with a caseload of, I think we're both around 540.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay, and Comfort?
Here, our caseloads are a bit smaller. We're actually at around maybe 80 to 100 students. We are assigned primarily to the freshmen on campus. We do also advise, all the other students on campus who just happen at our door, but as far as the students specifically assigned to us, it's about 80 to 100.
All right. Wow. Okay. A couple of questions about that 8 credit limit that you all have at NOVA. First of all, does it affect financial aid at all if they can only take 8 credits? And then also, let's see, can that be waived? Is there any way that that limit can be changed?
Yes, yes to both. So yes, it affects financial aid. So they can potentially lose some grants, and then they can also, if they get Pell Grant or whatnot, that does get reduced. So usually with financial aid, it's similar to academic standing, but it's a little different. They get a semester of financial aid warning. So usually if they're screwing up academically, they're going to lose their financial aid anyway because they're not going to meet satisfactory academic progress. But yes, being forced to be a part-time student can affect financial aid. But they also can appeal and petition to us, and I think it has to go up to the Dean of Students if they want to be a full-time student. So like international students have to be full-time. So they have different rules. But any student who insists on being full-time can petition for that. Now, we don't come across that very often because most of our students who ended up on academic probation immediately realized that something just wasn't right and it might be a good idea to be part-time, at least to get themselves back on the academic track.
Okay, great. Comfort, next question is for you. If you only have the ability to meet with students for maybe 30 minutes at a time or less, depending on with a large caseload, what can you do in that amount of time to encourage a growth mindset? Do you have any specific things that you could suggest?
With a short period of time, not sure if you're going to meet with a student again, I would encourage the use of growth questions, maybe focusing on the effort and process the student is putting forth, not just jumping to the grades and focusing only on grades. I find when I do this, it helps me to identify where a student is and kind of what their attitudes are, so I can see what they're open to and how to best help them. If they're not doing as well as they hope, maybe evaluate the effort they put forth, and I help them to evaluate what they've learned, how they can use this information to improve, and also work on action plans, just helping them to figure out what are some small achievable steps that they can do to help them build their confidence. And as part of that plan, some of those steps maybe to come back and check in with me again, just hopefully to bring them back into my office to continue that discussion.
Okay, so a follow-up on that then is that mindset conversation built into every advising session, or is that something that you do in a specific appointment and really focus on that?
With most of the advising sessions, I do try to use growth questions just to kind of get a sense as to where a student is. Part of it is just when I'm asking these questions about how things are going, what have they been doing, just to see how open they are to the ideas of mindset and how open they are in terms of where their mindset is. Is it more growth or fixed? To better help direct the discussion.
Okay, great, thanks. Noelle and Vanessa, following up on the mid-semester report, is that required? Does the student have to fill it in? And what happens if they don't do it?
So this is probably the one thing that we get the most pushback from our students is doing this darn mid-semester progress report. And part of it is, we remind the students that it is a tool for them and for us to figure out how they're doing in their class. So it is mandatory. It is something that students have known about from when they first signed the contract, when they are first admitted into the program, and we remind them every single semester that they've got this registration hold that will not be removed until they turn that report in to us and they talk to us. If a student does not turn in a mid-semester progress report, then we will not do advising with them until their grades are posted for that semester. And so, as you can imagine, grades don't post, especially in the fall, until right before Christmas. So we usually have a rush of students coming in right before we close for advising. And at that point, usually a lot of our classes are full for the following semester. So we really try to advertise it and remind them on a regular basis, try to advertise it early on in the semester so they're not faced with that crunch at the end.
Yeah, I would also add, we don't have students who refuse to do it. They're not happy about it, but the students who don't do it, they're just the ones that wait to the last minute to come in for advising. So after their grades are posted, we no longer require the mid-semester report because we know exactly how they did.
Okay, and following up on that word refuse, I'm seeing a question in the lineup here that is pretty similar to one that I asked you, I remember, in rehearsal about resistance and refusal, either passive or outright. If folks don't want to meet with you, they resist or they just don't respond, what do you do?
Nothing. We all have those students, right, who just want to be difficult because they like to be difficult. But if the student refuses to meet with us, whether it's an academic probation or just the semesterly meetings that we require, they don't have to, we don't do anything to force them to come in. But they do have a hold on their account that prevents them from registering for future semester, for the next semester. So at some point, they do have to come in to talk with one of us. It might be, as Vanessa mentioned, at the very last minute when we don't have too many classes left. And then we use that as a learning tool for them to show them why it's important to come in before. And then we also always have the discussion of the purpose of the mid-semester progress report. It's not just, here you go. It's the purpose of this is so we know how you're doing so we can best advise you for next semester. We require you to come in to see us so we can advise you, because if you want to do a major at one school, it's different than the exact same major at another university, and so on. So whenever we do get to see them, we try to explain the benefit and the purpose of what we're doing. And usually by that point, I would say they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So we do still have those students who wait till last minute, and some give difficulty, but for the most part, they understand the purpose of it.
Okay, great. Comfort, this one's for you, and it looks like it's floating in both here in the webinar and also out in the Twitter sphere. Folks are wondering if you might possibly give an example or two of a specific growth question that you might ask.
Well, it might depend on the student's situation. If they just recently didn't do well on the test, for example, maybe asking them how can they use that to improve their performance in future exams, and then giving them some ideas on, have you reviewed the last test? Have you kind of seen, what mistakes have you made? Are there things that you can adjust when you're studying for the next test or as you move forward in the class? Or if they're celebrating something, kind of like, great, that's great. So let's see what's next. What are your goals for the future?
Okay, great, thank you. And I'm seeing several questions in the lineup, and we've only got one more, so I'm going to put some of these together on career advising is an area of interest. Does this play a role in anything that you all do? And Vanessa and Noel, we'll start with you.
So I'll actually have Noel start with this part.
Okay, so I'm going to say yes. Part of it is finding a direction, like especially with the probation students. Sometimes the lack of motivation and the willingness to learn is because they don't really know what direction they're heading in. So it's hard to teach them to move forward if they don't know which way forward is. So a lot of it, I don't necessarily do career exploration per se, because I think that can be overwhelming for students. So we look at majors, because there's so many career options with certain majors that I start with what majors and what classes at the universities look interesting to you, and then we go from there. But that is definitely part of, with the probation students in particular, conversation that I have with all of them. That is on the survey, the assessment that we do. We ask them if they know what they want to do and if they're content with that. So we know if we need to do more exploration with that. So it is definitely something that I touch on.
Okay, great. And in our last few seconds, Comfort, anything to add? Do you all work with that at all?
I think we kind of touch upon it, but similar to what Noelle said, we focus a lot more on the major aspect of it. I think Noelle's answer kind of covers a lot of what I would see, speak with a student about during a session.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like our time is up. So thank you all for being with us today. Folks, if you had questions that we weren't able to get to, as I said at the beginning, you do have our presenter's email address, so feel free to follow up with them. Thank you all for being with us today. Thank you, Comfort, Noelle, Vanessa, for this terrific information that you've shared with us. I'm sure it's been very helpful to everyone. Thank you. Gary?